Hello and welcome to the July 2021 edition of the Pembrokeshire Bird Diary. I'm Annie Haycock from the Pembrokeshire Bird Group, here to share some of the highlights of the month. July is often a quiet month as the breeding season for most species winds down. Birds are molting, exploring, or just beginning to fatten up for migration. The first migrants are dribbling through, and there is a chance of a few unusual species turning up. So perhaps it's a good time to take stock of the breeding season and how things have been going so far. For small birds, the breeding season is measured by the Breeding Bird Survey and the Constant Effort Site schemes run by the British Trust for Ornithology. Obviously, they haven't had time to analyse this season's data yet, but locally we can say that in Pembrokeshire we covered a record number of Breeding Bird Survey squares this year. The scheme began in 1994, and apart from the national lack of data in 2001, when foot and mouth disease restrictions got in the way, and again last year when the pandemic prevented people getting to their regular sites, we've done reasonably well. You won't be surprised that species such as blackbird, wren and chaffinch were recorded in all squares, but some lucky people managed rare species such as redstart and Dartford warbler. The curlew and common sandpiper don't breed here, but these would probably have been birds on migration. We still have a few squares that need surveyors, and every year one or two people have to drop out, so new volunteers are always welcome. On the Constant Effort site on the Tivy Marshes Reserve, the Tivy ringing group caught a juvenile Chetty's warbler. This was the first likely to have been bred there since the beast from the east wiped out the previously successful breeding population in early 2018. A sedge warbler was trapped on the Tivy marshes on the 1st of July in the same net as when it was ringed 6 years, 11 months and 8 days before. It appears to break the Welsh longevity record for this species by about 3 weeks. Seabirds provide the main interest in breeding birds here, and we have a long-term data sets for several areas, including the limestone coast in the south and, of course, our seabird islands. Guillemot counts along the South Pembrokeshire coast show that the species is doing well here, with the population apparently stabilising after a steady increase during the past few decades. The total for June 2021 was just under 19,000, most of these on the Elagug stacks. Guillemot and razorbill chicks leave the cliffs when they're about 3 weeks old, so most were gone by the middle of the month. However, 3 new razorbill chicks were found on Skocombe on the 10th. These were from some of the pairs that had lost their first eggs during the storms at the end of May and had laid again. Overall, Skocombe razorbills had a fairly good year. On the study plots, where nests are intensively observed as opposed to just being counted, an average of almost half the nests produced a jumpling, a chick that survived long enough to jump from the cliffs and go out to sea with its father. Success was much lower for those pairs that had to make a second attempt, with only a quarter of these producing a jumpling. July is often a good time to see large numbers of puffins as many non-breeding birds visit the colonies to seek out mates and nest burrows ready for next year. And if it's wet or misty, they often just hang around for the day. Meanwhile, more and more of this year's pufflings are departing each night, and the vast majority will be gone before the end of the month. Fulmars, like their relatives the Manx shearwater and storm petrel, are relatively late breeders, with long incubation and chick rearing periods. The chicks won't be fledging until late August, early September. On the subject of storm petrels, the Skocombe Petrel Station is proving a hit with the birds. About half the known population of British storm petrels nest on Skocombe, so it's a good place to study them. The artificial wall built for them a few years ago now has several of the nest boxes occupied. Some boxes have been fitted with cameras, allowing non-intrusive observations to be made. These include watching a pair mating and the first views of a new chick. On July the 8th, 2 Skocombe stormies that had been ringed as chicks in 2019 were caught in mist nets. One of these was from a nest in the cottage garden wall, the other was from the petrol station. At Newport, Sam Baxter noted there had been 5 pairs of shelduck, which was about the same as for the last 20 or so years that he'd been keeping an eye on them. However, this year he had not seen a single duckling. On the Cleddau estuary system, things were looking a little bit better, with 14 broods recorded, but that's still well down on the numbers seen in the mid-1990s. The diaries for May and June commented on stonechats breeding on Skokholm for the first time since 1932. After fledging a single youngster from their first attempt, the pair have now fledged 4 from their second brood. Out on Ramsey, Greg also had news of a new breeding species. Well, the first time since 1973 anyway. At the end of the month, a fledgling cuckoo was being fed by a meadow pipit around the arable plot. A once common breeder, this species has been declining nationally. In recent years, Ramsey has sometimes failed to record any, even on migration. This year was a good year, however, with at least 3 birds logged in the spring, 1 a long-staying singing male and 1 clearly a female. Greg had joked that they should look out for the young this year, but never really expected it. It was fascinating to see the meadow pipit frantically searching for food for its begging fledgling. However, when it came to feeding the bird, it was clearly very wary. A nagging voice must have been telling it that something wasn't quite right, but its instinct to feed the impostor had formed a bond which was just too strong. Whenever the young cuckoo flew, the meadow pipit went with it, shadowing its every move. It is a remarkable breeding strategy, and one Greg had never seen in the flesh before, so this was a real privilege. The fact that they managed to breed on Ramsey is hopefully a sign that they did well in general this year. 2 juvenile cuckoos appeared on Skokholm on the 24th, both wholly independent and presumably from elsewhere. At the time of recording this, I haven't seen any other records of cuckoos breeding in Pembrokeshire this year, although a young bird was seen in a Haverfordwest garden on the 3rd. Of course, there were movements of unusual birds as the month progressed. A single great egret has been frequenting the Fortune's Frolic section of the Western Cleddau, sometimes as far upstream as the Bristol Trader. Swift Awareness Week ran from the 3rd to the 11th of July, and certainly there was a flurry of swift observations in the middle of the month. David Ramsey had put up a swift nest box earlier in the year, and now reported that 1 or 2 small parties of swifts gave the box a close inspection on the 15th and 16th. With any luck, they'll take up residence in this and perhaps some of the other boxes that have been provided, as mentioned back in the May diary, when they return next year. Elsewhere, parties of screaming swifts were reported as birds began to head south for the winter. Skokholm saw its second Sub-Alpine Warbler of the year on the 18th. It hung around the wheelhouse for a while before being caught and ringed. The small, neat white tips to the outer primaries, and later DNA analysis of a dropped feather, confirmed that it was a female western subalpine. Ospreys were reported on several occasions, usually single birds, but at least 2 were on the upper parts of the Cleddau, as only one of them was wearing a ring. Small numbers of Mediterranean gulls were seen throughout the month, including a group of 10 at Saundersfoot, and what is presumed to be the same individual as last year, taking up residence at Carew Mill Pond again. 1 ringed bird turned up at Newport. White 3FN2 was ringed as an adult in Antwerp in Belgium in May 2019 and was in Newport a couple of months later. It continued to move around, being seen in Newport again in January 2020, in Anglesey in March and again in November that year, and now, almost 2 years to the day of its first visit, it was back at Newport. On the subject of ringed gulls, there were also 2 black-headed gulls showing off their colours at Newport. Black 2CHN was ringed as a nestling near Birmingham in 2019 and was seen at Newport on and off between December that year and mid-March 2021. Now it is back. White 26LO was ringed as a nestling near Reading in June 2013. It was seen at Newport in September 2014, on the Tyvee in July 2015 and at Angle Bay in August that year. In July 2016 it was reported from South Devon, back at Newport in July 2017 and now back here again. So where has it been for the last 4 years? Well, that's it for July. Thank you for watching, and I hope you'll look out for the next edition.